there! Thanks for tuning in to one of our online sermons today. My name is Brianna Grunwald, and I'm the River Kids Director here at our Burton location at the River Church. And we'd love to connect with you today. One of the ways that you can connect is by texting River Connect, one word, to 970-00, or by visiting our website at theriverchurch.cc to see more about who we are, what we do, and our upcoming events. If you'd like to give to the River Church, you can do so by texting that dollar amount to 84321 or by clicking the Give tab on our website. We hope you're blessed and encouraged by the message today.
Well, good morning, church. So good to see all of you that are here in person. Thank you for joining us online. Thank you for being part of our gathering that way. I am not Josh, clearly. I am Keaton. I'm the Director of Students and Young Adults here. And this morning, I have the privilege of opening God's Word with you. Happy Memorial Day weekend. Thanks so much for being here or joining us online. You guys showed up at 10 a.m. I don't know if any of you came at 9, not knowing we had switched to one gathering, but I at least enjoyed the extra hour of sleep. So I hope you did as well. If you usually come to the 9, or I'm sorry if you had to get up a little earlier if you do usually come to the 11. But this morning, we are going to be continuing our series in Proverbs. I hope that you have been enjoying it. I know that I have. I hope you've been reading along, maybe a proverb a day, kind of correlating with the month, as there's 31 Proverbs. I hope you've been challenged by it and encouraged, and really I hope you've seen the value of wisdom. So this morning, before we dive in, I'm gonna pray, and then we'll get into it. Lord, I thank you for today. Thank you for your word that is unchanging. Lord, your wisdom that stands day after day, year after year. Lord, your wisdom that is good for all times. Thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, in whom we see the perfect personification of wisdom. Lord, who is wise in all his ways, Lord, but yet in his goodness came down for us. So Lord, I just ask that we would see the beauty of your word today. Would you speak through me, Lord, just as a conveyor of your word? Would you be honored and glorified? Give you the praise in the name of Jesus. Amen. So we're going to jump right in. If you want to grab your Bibles with me, we'll be in Proverbs chapter 9. We're picking up pretty much not too far off of where Josh left off last week. So we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 9. Last week we saw really the first 6 verses of Proverbs chapter 9. We saw the value of wisdom through the personification of wisdom, this lady wisdom that represents wisdom. And then we also saw her house, the invitation that she is giving, that she is extending really to each and every person. And so chapter 9 here, we spent the first 6 verses. Last week we examined that, and so chapter 9 is broken up into 3 6-verse kind of sections. We see verses 1 through 6, the first 6 last week, Lady Wisdom. The second 6 verses are talking about the scoffer, which we're going to focus on next week. And the last 6 verses, where we're going to spend most of our time today, talking about Lady Folly and her house, ultimately the house of fools. And so that's where we're going to be today. We're going to be contrasting Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. We're going to see the invitations that they offer and why ultimately the invitation of Lady Wisdom is the one that we want to and the one that we should choose to accept. So one of the things that we got to know here is the first 9 chapters of Proverbs are really an introduction to the rest of the book. If you've been reading along, or if you've spent time studying Proverbs or reading it in the past, you notice that the first 9 chapters aren't quite as poetic, traditionally poetic, as the rest of the book. The first 9 it's Solomon speaking to his son, or us ultimately, the reader, and then the last, from chapter 10 on, the rest are much more poetical. They're small sayings that in and of themselves don't always correlate to the verses right immediately before, the sayings, the proverbs right after them and before them. And so, in chapter 9 here, Solomon is extending an invitation. He's calling his son that he's writing to, but also us, the reader. He's laying out 2 paths for us, and each person must choose which path they will follow. So let's dive in. We're going to just go back. We're going to begin in verse 1. We're going to read verses 1 through 6, and then we're going to jump down to verse 13. Kind of recap from last week. So Proverbs 9:1. It says, "Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks sense, she says, come, eat of my bread, drink of the wine that I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live, and walk in the way of insight. We'll jump down to verse 13, now talking about Lady Folly and her feast that she is extending. It says, the woman Folly is loud, she is seductive, and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. And so we see here two banquets, or two feasts, two invitations, one from Lady Wisdom, and the other one from Lady Folly. So in both of them, both Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly, both of them have a house. Both of them are calling out to the simple. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the simple. The simple is the uncommitted person, the person who isn't necessarily down one of these two paths, but is stuck in the middle, left to decide. They're not willing to take a step. And so both Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly are calling out to the simple. But that's about where the similarities end between the two invitations. You see, Lady Wisdom, she has built her house. First couple verses say that she has hewn her pillars. There's 7 pillars. This is a sign of great wealth. She's industrious, working hard. She's preparing the feast, while Lady Folly is just sitting at the door of her house. She's sitting idly and calling out. See, Lady Wisdom's house leads to life and ultimately walking in the way of insight and knowledge, which begins with a fear of the Lord. But Lady Folly's house leads to death, to the depths of Sheol, or hell ultimately. Death is what this means here. And what we have to understand before we go too much further is that these two invitations that are extended to each person, they are mutually exclusive. You can't have a little bit of one and a little bit of the other. It's not like, right, it's grad party season, right? You know how a grad party, it's open from 1 to 4. You got 2 parties at the same time. You got to go one at the beginning, at the end, right? The next party you go to at the end. That's not how this feast, this banquet, these invitations work. These are two mutually exclusive invitations. You choose one or the other. For me, it's kind of like this. Next week, my favorite band has a concert, and I have been trying to see this band for like 3 years now, right? So the first time I wanted to go see them play, COVID happened. They canceled the concert, right? Second time I wanted to go see them play, I was like, I'm doing it. This is the time. Finally get to see them play. It was on a Sunday night. The only time they were local here was on a Sunday night when we have our student growth community, and so I chose to be there. Third time my favorite band came to the area, it was the night of our student Christmas party, right? Still couldn't go. So I saw that next week there's a concert in Royal Oak. And I was like, I am not missing this for the world, right? I've been trying 4 times now to finally get to see them. And there was nothing that I was going to do to be there. I was invited to this concert, right? I had the ability to get a ticket. But then we scheduled our young adult retreat for next weekend, right? You see, I got to choose one or the other because the concert's in Royal Oak, right? Our young adult retreat is all the way up in Rose City, Michigan, probably 3 hours from Royal Oak, up at New Life Camp. And I'm excited to both. I want to go to both so badly, but I must choose one or the other. I can't go to both. I can't be in Rose City and Royal Oak at the same time, right? So ultimately, I've chosen to go on the young adult retreat, and I have no regrets, okay? So I'm very looking forward to it. I'm so excited for it. But in the same way, I had to choose one or the other. I couldn't go to both. The invitations of Lady Folly and Lady Wisdom are like that. They are mutually exclusive. You choose one or the other. And all of us must make this decision. The question that Solomon is proposing as he's concluding his introduction here to his son, but also us, the reader, is which invitation will you choose to accept? I love this one pastor, he called this chapter the Battle of the Banquets. There's 2 banquets, 2 feasts that are vying for us. We've been invited to both, and we must choose. And so last week we focused on the feast that Lady Wisdom offers, and so today let's get into the banquet that Lady Folly invites us to. So verse 13, we'll pick it up there. It says, "The woman Folly is loud. She is seductive and knows nothing." So as we get a picture of this personification of Lady Folly, we see that she's loud, she's seductive, and she knows nothing. And so she's loud, she's calling out. You can hear her from anywhere. She's seductive, she looks good, she's deceitful, but she also knows nothing. One of the commentators, H.D.M. Spence, he says, "Ignorance is the natural accompaniment of folly. In this case, her ignorance is willful and persistent. She goes on her way of reckless consequences." Or Proverbs 5:6, just earlier in Proverbs, Solomon writes, speaking of Lady Folly here, it says, "She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways wander, and she does not know it." So the first thing we need to know about Lady Folly is that she knows nothing. We're going to see later how she's just a mimicker of Lady Wisdom, but what she knows nothing of is consequences. Whether she chooses to know this, whether she knows the consequences or not, it doesn't specify. But we know that if she does know the consequences, she willfully chooses to ignore them. Her ways wander. She does not know it. She does not ponder the path of life. And the thing about so many people today, really the world or culture, is that we aren't taught to think about the way that we live, right? We say things instead like, just live or live it up or follow your dreams, right? Go with the flow. Go wherever life takes you. But that's the call of folly. Folly does not consider where it is going, does not consider its life and the path that it is walking down. So Lady Folly knows nothing of the consequences that her path leads to, or rather, she chooses to ignore it. Let's pick it up in verse 14. What do we see about Lady Folly? It says, "She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town." So Lady Folly is just sitting at the door of her house. We see earlier in the chapter, in contrast to Lady Wisdom, Lady Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. Lady Wisdom is working hard to prepare the feast. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She is setting the table. While Folly is just sitting idly at the door of her house, calling out to those there. Her feast does not compare to Lady Wisdom's feast at all. And so one of the first warnings to us that we see in Lady Folly here is that idle hands are much more apt to fall into folly. Or if we call it like it is, idle hands are much more apt to fall into sin. I know for myself, I'm a late night person, right? I love to stay up at night. And for me, I've had to learn that the later I stay up at night, right, at past 10 o'clock, I do nothing, past 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, right? I do nothing productive, right? Those hours are pretty much just useless, right? For me, they're spent sometimes reading, maybe playing video games, watching TV, scrolling my phone, whatever it might be, right? But those hours are my idle hours, and I do absolutely nothing productive in those times. But also, in those times is where I'm much more willing to listen to the lies of the enemy, right? The temptations of the evil one, when I'm just sitting there doing nothing, just passing the time to pass the time. And it's not that there's anything wrong with resting, right? We each need rest. And the Lord knows that, but we need to have healthy ways of resting, right? Let's be honest. Sitting in front of the TV and scrolling on our phone hours and hours every evening is not rest. It's exhausting. It may feel restful in the moment, but over and over, day after day, that idleness is folly, and that leads to more folly. What I've learned to myself is that just a little bit of folly breeds more and more folly, right? I'm just going to stay up another hour, right? And then it becomes 2 hours, and then it's 2 a.m., and I got to get up in the morning for work, right? And it's just, it's useless. It's these idle hands that we need to be weary of. It's the warning we see here. And then we see also that Lady Folly, she takes a seat on the highest places of the town. She is looking for attention. She wants to be seen. You don't have to look hard to find folly, because folly is out there for everyone to see. Folly is attention seeking. It wants you to look at it and be drawn in. And ultimately, folly looks good to our senses usually, right? Folly catches our eye, or looks good, or smells good, or tastes good, or feels good, right? Folly catches our senses in that because it's out there for all to see. Verse 15 says she takes a seat in the highest places of the town. She's calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. You see, the call of Folly is not above anybody. Nobody is too good for the call of Folly, because Folly is calling out loudly for all to see. But who is she calling out to? Those who are going straight on their way. Right? If we go back to this picture of her and her house, as Josh said last week, two houses across the street from each other, one of Lady Wisdom, one of Lady Folly. There's people walking in the middle, and they are both Lady Folly and Lady Wisdom are calling out to people who are going straight, trying to draw them in. She's calling out to those who are going straight on their way. Peter talks about this in the book of 1 Peter chapter 5. Verses 8 and 9, you don't have to turn there, but Peter says, "Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world." Even those who are walking the straight and narrow, those who are followers of Christ, we must be weary of the attacks of the evil one. Nobody is too good for this. And so how do we resist? Well, in 1 Peter, right, if we combine it with what Paul says in Ephesians, we put on the armor of God day after day. We're in the Word. We're preparing ourselves for the battle that is there, where the evil one is out to get us. He's trying to tempt us and call us into folly and sin, ultimately. So we must all be aware of the call of folly. And so what is folly calling out to those who pass by? Verse 16 says she's calling out, "Whoever is simple, let him turn in here." This is a perfect repetition of what we see earlier in the chapter of Wisdom calling out. In verse 4, Wisdom says, "Whoever is simple, let him turn in here," right? Lady Folly, what she's calling out ends right there. But Lady Wisdom continues on. "Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, she says, come eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live, and walk in the way of insight." Lady Wisdom is calling out, saying, leave your simple ways. But Lady Folly is just trying to draw you in. We see this pattern over and over, that Lady Folly is just mimicking Wisdom. There's just enough truth to her that we're drawn in, that it looks good, but then she deceives, like a false teacher, ultimately. Someone who doesn't truly preach the gospel, right? There's enough truth in there. They open the Bible but don't actually preach it, right? Or they just pick one verse and then, whatever it might be, and then they add on from there and there. Like all false teachers, they take their cue from Lady Folly here. Mimicking Wisdom. There's enough truth to draw people in. We're going to see this over and over, that Lady Folly is a mimicker of Wisdom. She knows nothing, if we remember what was said earlier. And it's not that she knows literally nothing, but Lady Folly knows just enough to get by. She knows just enough to look good. People are attracted to her because of her looks and her loud voice, right? It's like the young, hip preacher maybe who has just enough truth to make you listen in, is broadcast everywhere. It's the preacher that says it's the gospel and this, right? There's just enough truth that sounds familiar, it sounds good, but if we aren't careful, we must be weary of the call of folly. And so Folly continues on. In verse 16, to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread that is eaten in secret is pleasant. She's calling out to those who are passing by. She's tempting them with stolen water and bread that is eaten in secret. You see, Wisdom offered flesh and wine to her guests. Folly offers bread and water. Wisdom invites to a well-furnished table. Folly calls out to a secret, hidden meal of barest victuals. What the former offers is rich and satisfying and comforting, but what Folly offers gives is poor and mean and insipid. But you see, the draw of folly is the charm of it being forbidden. It's attractive because it is unlawful. Same commentator, H.M. Spence, that's what he says. See, folly's reward, what folly is trying to draw each person in with, is a cheap substitute for what wisdom offers. It mimics it just enough to make it enticing, but it lacks the true long-term pleasure and satisfaction that wisdom offers. Later on in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 17, Solomon says, "Bread gained by deceit is sweet to a man, but afterward his mouth will be full of gravel." You see, the truth is that sin, folly, we're going to say they're very similar. They're almost the same thing here. Sin, it feels good in the moment many times. We don't have to make ifs, ands, or buts about it. We don't have to, it's the truth. Sin feels good in the moment. It's enticing because it's unlawful, because it's forbidden oftentimes. Bread gained by deceit is sweet to a man, but ultimately, the person who's stealing and eating this sweet bread, their mouth will be full of gravel. And I saw this for myself a couple years ago. Well, a long time ago at this point, I guess. I'm not quite as old as Josh, but I've lived a good amount of my life, right? Sorry, that was a low blow. You're not up here to defend yourself. But when I was in high school, my senior year, I took a couple visits to a couple different Christian colleges just to figure out where I was going to go for college. And one of the schools, I get there, and it was an overnight visit. So I sat in on a class in the afternoon. In the evening, I was staying with a couple of the current students who had allowed me to sleep on their couch while I was there to stay the night. And so the night is going on, and they're like, "Hey, you want to go chipping with us?" And I'm like, "What is chipping? I've never heard of, are we going to stuff our faces with chips? What are we going to do here?" And they were like, "Let me tell you." They're like, "We'll give you the real experience." And I was like, "Okay." So what they go on to tell me is that a couple miles from the college, there was a Frito-Lay distribution center. And they knew that every Thursday night, the Frito-Lay distribution center would take all their soon-to-be expired bags of chips, fully enclosed bag of chips, and they would fill their dumpster with them. And so they said, "What we're going to do, we do this not all Thursdays, but we do it a lot of times. We're going to go to the Frito-Lay distribution center, and we are going to get as many chips as we can." And I'm like, okay, this is going to be fun, a little dangerous, a little bit forbidden, but not quite illegal, right? They're in the dumpster, right? So they convinced me, and technically I was a minor. They shouldn't have even taken me off campus, but I didn't know the rules, right? I'm just a bunch of college kids are like, "Come and do this." So get in the car, we drive to the Frito-Lay factory. As in every good movie, right, it starts to get misty and rainy and foggy, and we're like, "Oh, this is going to be perfect," right? We drive around. The front gate of the distribution center was wide open, but that was way too easy. We drive around the back, and we see the dumpsters at the back of the property. The only thing separating us in a dumpster full of chips was a barbed wire fence. So what do? Grab the floor mats out of the car, put them over the barbed wire, hop over the fence. We open that dumpster, and I kid you not, it is filled to the brim with every type of Frito-Lay chip you can imagine. Bags of them, enclosed. They weren't even going to expire for 2 weeks, right? College student, that's heaven, right? And so, hop the fence, we get this, and they're like, "Dude, we've never seen this many chips in our life. This is the greatest night ever." And we are filling, contractor-sized garbage bags, filled with chips. We get so many chips that they're like, "Get in the car, we're going to stuff them in on top of you," right? So, we get as many chips as we can imagine. We take them back to the school, and we're like the heroes, right? We have as many chips as you could ever want in your life, right? They were great, and so we get back, and we start handing them out, and we are so cool, right? Yeah, I had one bag of chips, right? But what I learned about myself and really human nature, but folly in that moment, is that I didn't want a car full of chips, right? But we wanted as many as we could forget. They were just enough forbidden that we were attracted to them and drawn in, right? In sin, that's what sin does to us. It's like that no trespassing sign, right? You see on somebody's property, you're like, I didn't want to trespass before, but now that I can't, right? Why don't they want me in there, right? What are they keeping from me, right? It's that same thing. It's our sinful nature in us that folly uses that to draw us in, because sin, this bread that folly offers, is sweet in the moment. See, the thing about this promise that folly offers, though, John Walvoord puts it well. He says, here as elsewhere, folly offers immediate gratification, whereas wisdom offers long-term satisfaction. I saw this firsthand just this past week. After my wife Haley and I had finished dinner, I was cleaning the pots and pans, and I took our plates off the table, and I'm kind of rinsing them off, and I put them in the dishwasher, and we kind of started a bad habit with our dog Wrigley, where sometimes we let him lick the plates in the dishwasher. All right? So if you ever eat at our house, I'm sorry, our dog has probably licked that plate at one point in its life. It's always before it's washed, so they get clean afterwards. But I put the plate in there, and Wrigley just like jumps on it, right? He's like going crazy. There's like barely anything on that plate, right? But he wanted just that taste of that. I think we had pad thai that night or something, right? He wanted just that taste that tasted so good in the moment. I'm like, typical dog, right? And then I turned around, and I realized that right behind him was his full to the brim bowl of perfectly good dog food, right? But he wanted that taste of that sweet chicken, that pad thai, whatever is in there. But the thing about what he was licking off those plates is that would never sustain him. It tasted really good, right? But there's no sustenance in that sweet taste, right? In that just that little taste of it that would never last him. If that was all he'd ate, he wouldn't make it more than a week or two, right? All the while, the perfectly good bowl of food is right behind him. That bowl of dog food, that is what is going to sustain him and fill him and give him energy and life, right? And so often, we do the exact same thing, right? Wisdom is out there. The invitation of wisdom is out there for us. Lady Wisdom offers us a feast that is overflowing. She has slaughtered the beasts and mixed the wine and set the table, and she offers us this feast. But all the while, we choose to go for the taste. We need that taste, what feels good and tastes good and smells good, right? Whatever it is, we give in to what folly is offering because it tastes so good in the moment. But it will never, ever last or fill us or satisfy us. Right? It's the person that's living above their means. You spend more than you make, right? Because you just need to look good because it looks good in the moment. Or the person that maybe eats more day after day than you need because it just tastes so good, but in the long term, that's not going to work for you. Or the person that is working 80 hours a week at the neglect of their family, right? Because they just need more and more and more. It feels good in the moment, but it will never satisfy. See, sin, it feels good, it tastes good in the moment, but there's always a cost to sin. There's always a cost to the invitation of Lady Folly. F.B. Meyer puts it well. He says, the greater the man or woman, the dearer the price they pay for a short season of sinful pleasure. You see, sin, it feels good in the spring, in the summer. It's fun, right? You're out, you're living it up. But then comes the fall of sin and the winter of sin, where what was just supposed to be a quick detour becomes a way of life. You get into the fall, the winter of sin, where you realize the cost of it, where we realize it's dark and empty, and leaves us satisfied. And the pattern that we see here in Proverbs 9, and that I've ultimately seen in my own life as well, is that folly often follows our feelings. The quick fix is usually the way of folly. If we are purely living based off of the way we feel, what feels good in the moment, that is more often than not the way of folly. When you're behind on a project at work or school, right? Folly says, just take the easy way out, blame somebody else, right? Don't put in the work. Don't work hard to get back on track, right? Or when you're running late to a meeting, folly says go faster, drive faster, well over the speed limit, instead of taking responsibility for being late, right? Or when you're feeling alone, folly says that the internet is going to make you feel better, least for a moment that is right, but that will never satisfy in the long term. And why is folly so dangerous? What's the problem with indulging just a little bit? Why can't we just take a detour into the house of folly? Proverbs tells us in verse 18, it says, this is the person that enters to the house of folly, he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. You see, wisdom leads to life, but folly leads to death. Sometimes the house of folly, the path of folly, leads to literal physical death. Right? The person who chooses to live in folly and drink and drive can very quickly lead to real death. Right? The person who just decides to dabble in drugs, right, can quickly lead to death. Or the person that habitually drives well over the speed limit, one night of recklessness, right, that can literally lead to death. You see, but someone who lives a life of folly, someone that's clearly not a follower of Christ, that surely also leads to an eternal, spiritual, but very real death as well. But also, the person who just takes a quick detour in the way of folly begins a slow death. Right, this past Sunday, we honored our high school graduates, right? And each of them are beginning a new stage in their life, and some are going off to school, some are staying around here, but the college student who just chooses to just 4 years, I'm just going to live it up for 4 years, right? The college experience, right, says drink and live everything and sleep around and get with everybody you can and just take in all that your senses desire, take in everything, right? That person who just chooses to take that quick detour, even that just begins quick, slow death. Or the young professional that's just getting into the working world, or the adult that feels like you're having a midlife crisis. I just need to dabble. I just need to experience a little bit of this, of what the evil one is calling me to, what Lady Folly is calling me to. Even just dabbling in that begins a slow death. See, that person that takes a detour into the house of folly, their senses, their giftings, their passions, the things that God has designed and created in them so beautifully, so good, begins to lose sensitivity, begins a long, slow death. Growing up, one of the things that my family loved to do is we went camping. And I remember as I started to get a little older, began to see signs more and more of like no transporting firewood into the campground, right? And I'm like, why? We have like these trees at home. Why can't we bring our own firewood? And as I got older, began to, kind of realize that the reason we couldn't bring firewood into the campgrounds was because of this invasive species called the emerald ash borer. And the thing about the emerald ash borer, it's an invasive species from Russia, Japan. It was brought over to the U.S. in wood. You see, and what this ash borer does is it begins by just eating the leaves of the tree. It feeds off that. But then its larva makes its way into the trunk of the tree here. And it feeds on the underside of the bark, eventually cutting the tree off from the transportation of nutrients and water. And it continues on. The larva begins more and more eating the inside of the tree. All the while on the outside, that tree looks great. Or you can't really tell too much of a difference. You see some leaves that are kind of eaten, but on the inside, there's an ash borer that is killing that tree slowly. I remember, cutting down trees that had the ash borer in them, and then you just see lines and lines all throughout the wood where the ash borer bore. And what happens is that tree rots from the inside out, literally. Eventually, if the ash borers are there long enough, the tree rots out and falls down, and that tree is dead on the inside out. It looks good on the outside, but on the inside, it's dying slowly. In the same way, sin, folly, begins on the inside, rotting that person's passions, gifts, abilities, and joy, leading to a slow, miserable death. See, it just doesn't begin all in one moment, though. More often than not, folly begins with just one step into the house of folly. Paul Koptek, a commentator, he says, decision demonstrates character so that one becomes either a mocker or a wise one. Wisdom offers a future, a call to maturity, and in a word, life. Folly only offers the immediate pleasure of good things enjoyed outside their intended boundaries, hiding the fact that such pleasure brings death. So how do we know which path we're going on, which path we're beginning to step down? A good indicator is that as folly often follows feelings, wisdom, the way of wisdom, is often the opposite of our feelings. See, following the way of wisdom often requires doing the opposite of what we feel in the moment, remembering and focusing, taking the path that pays off in the long term, in this life, but also in the life to come, in eternity. You see, in this path, this picture of wisdom is perfectly fulfilled, personified in the person of Jesus Christ. See, the feast that wisdom offers, or the feast that Jesus offers, is abundant and overflowing. It has everything that we need and more. This feast offers long-term satisfaction, a life that is full and long in eternity with Christ. Jesus speaks of this specifically in John 10:10 when he says, "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come that you may have life and life abundantly." See, to follow Christ is to follow the way of wisdom. I so appreciate the way that Josh put it in he and Jen's book. He says it's a life of confidence in the eternal promises of the Lord. This is extended to each and every person. If you're here and you realized you're walking in the way of folly and you're not a follower of Christ, it first begins by, as Romans 3:23 says, admitting that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That means myself included, I have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, right? I have lived out folly. See, but then Romans continues in 10:9 to say, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead, you will be saved. And no person is too far gone from the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ. If you are in the house of folly today, or you're the simple still in the middle, not making your decision, Jesus is calling out to you, saying, come, follow me in this way of wisdom. He wants to rescue us from our sin and the penalty of it. Jesus came to this earth 2,000 years ago, born of a virgin. He lived the perfect life that we could not. None of us could. He died the death that we deserved for our sin, took the penalty, the consequences of our sin to the cross where he died. He was dead for 3 days. 3 days later, he came back to life to show his power over sin and death and ultimately the evil one. He went up to be with the Father, and he then extends his perfect life and death and resurrection in the way of wisdom to each and every single person. If you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And this person who's walking in the way of wisdom, who is a follower of Christ, is the person that has accepted that invitation. But the person who habitually follows the way of folly, your actions prove that you're not a follower of Jesus Christ. It's the person that dwells, hangs out, lives in the house of fools. They've rejected the authority and the wisdom of God's word. David talks about this in Psalm 14:1. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They're corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good. The fool is the one who says there is no God, who rejects the way of wisdom, who first and foremost rejects Jesus Christ and his word, but rejects the way of wisdom. So this whole time, I've been talking so negatively about folly, right? So why instead should we follow the way of wisdom? Because we've seen that folly is a mimic that knows nothing. Folly doesn't satisfy in the long run, and folly leads to death. And as folly leads to death, wisdom that comes from following Christ leads to true, full life in this life, in the next. See, in the feast that wisdom offers us. Again, Josh puts it well in their book. He says, the food of wisdom's feast is the fruit of the Spirit, the Lord's Supper, where Jesus' teachings are our daily bread, the food that sustains us day after day, that leads to true life. Like my dog, right? We each have a choice to make. Are we going to give in to what feels good, our senses in the moment? Or are we going to turn and accept the true feast, that wisdom that Christ offers us day in and day out, that leads to satisfaction and enjoyment and ultimately eternity with him? So, I just want to ask you as we conclude, which invitation will you accept? You can only accept one. Folly's invitation tastes great in the moment, but ultimately leaves you hungry, empty, and leads to death. Wisdom's food is true sustenance that leads to life. And so today, and each day forward, which will you choose? Let's pray.